Hello, everyone. Hello, Kelsey. Chelsea, can you see this? It's up there, right? Okay. And Chelsea, what I'm going to do, since it's controlled on my end, I'll just telepathically know when you need to change slides, and then we'll move on.
Okay, that sounds good.
And you just let me know if I'm wrong. All right, guys. Well, it is 2:00. Welcome to We Lead Presents Mental Health Tips. And I'm delighted to have so many people here who want to talk about mental health. I think it's probably not surprising why we chose this topic at this time. So much has changed in our world. And if everybody can go ahead and just double check, I think that we muted everybody on entry. If you can just double check that your microphone is muted, you can keep your camera on. I'm sharing the screen, so it doesn't really matter either way. You should probably be able to see me and Chelsea as we talk throughout up in your right-hand corner, if you want or not. And then we're going to talk about some mental health tips today, and Chelsea and I think, are both pretty excited to talk about some of the things that we have to share. So we're going to try to not translate that excitement into too many words, and leave some time at the end for questions. But of course, feel free to use the comment function throughout if there's something that you don't want to forget or something that isn't clear as we're talking, and we'll try to check that and clarify. But otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. Whoops, maybe. Okay. So first, we'll kind of start with some introductions. So Chelsea, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hello. I have like little thumbnails on the top. Nice to see a lot of you guys virtually. It was also nice to have a reason to get presentable looking today, honestly. I'm an assistant professor of psychology at SAM, and I have been since 2017, and I'm a psychologist as well. And there are many, Jamie and I were talking about current struggles in the time of Corona, and there are many, but probably the biggest one is trying to balance working with having kids. I have two daughters, in the absence of childcare. That has been something that is shared with a lot of people. So I've been able to reach out and get support from other people in a similar situation. But I would imagine some of you all know that has just been such a challenge, being a different kind of mom and a different kind of worker than I was before, when there was more people to sort of help me along in that. So I'll leave it at that. We can talk about how to address the struggle later, but I'll just put that out there.
And that's something that I think we're both gonna kind of do as we go through this. We're struggling the same way many of you guys are struggling, although I think Chelsea and I are kind of struggling in opposite ways in many respects. And so we're going to kind of share what we've done as part of this, and some of our own sort of challenges, maybe some mental health tips that we need to pay more attention to as well. And I'm Jaime Anderson. I'm also an assistant professor of psychology here at SAM, and I've been here since 2016. And I'm also one of your We Lead faculty board members. So I recognize some of your faces from different events. And my current struggle, so I don't have kids. And so my job, I lost an hour-long commute. A lot of the things that I was doing were rescheduled or canceled or postponed. So actually my problem is more that I feel like I have a lot of time on my hands and not a lot of structure. And so it's hard for me to remain motivated when I kind of have unstructured time from now till August, basically. And I think that presents its own challenges as well. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go through. But one of the reasons why we We Lead wanted to make this one of the events that we had this semester, was in part because there's so many different things that are changing right now. Even as many of us potentially start transitioning or thinking about transitioning, going back into the office, that office environment is going to look very different than what it looked like in the past. And our work environment for many of us has been taken from the office or a classroom to your home, and that presents with a lot of potential complications and difficulties. And also specific to We Lead issues and issues for women, there's a lot of increased responsibilities that disproportionately affect women in many circumstances, right? Where we moved from having childcare to having schools educate our children, right? To potentially not having childcare and having increased responsibility there. Trying to transition to being a homeschool teacher in many circumstances. Maybe your work duties have changed substantially. Or maybe you have increased care for a family member. Maybe you have grocery shopping responsibilities, all kinds of different, right? There's lots of different complications and responsibilities. And a lot of these fall on women in our society, right? So I think these issues that we're facing are particularly prevalent for many of the members of our organization. We also might have decreased motivation if your job responsibilities changed, or things that you were really passionate about got canceled or rescheduled or postponed. I think a lot of people are sort of facing this, what is my daily purpose, right? I'm not getting up and having a reason to get dressed and go to work and all these things that I think used to motivate us. So you might be facing that. And then of course, more than just our daily sort of challenges that come with our job or increased responsibilities, there's a lot of, I guess we could call it sort of existential stress going on, right? We might be worried about public health at large, the health of us, our family members, increased relationship stress maybe, or financial insecurity for many individuals. And then on top of all of that, many of our coping skills are being taken away, right? That we used to, when we were stressed, get together with friends and that helped, or go to the gym, or do a lot of activities that we enjoyed. And many of those activities shut down. So I think the pandemic in many respects has kind of created this perfect storm for mental health, where we've got a lot of increased stressors and potentially a lot of decrease in positive coping mechanisms. Luckily though, I think there's a lot of psychology principles that can help us here. And so we're going to sort of touch on a variety of these different things. Chelsea's going to focus a little bit more on the mindfulness and acceptance piece, and I'm going to talk about managing emotions and motivation. And I want to sort of you guys to keep in mind a little bit that these are snapshots of these therapeutic techniques. In many cases, these are things that we spend sessions upon sessions with clients trying to learn these different skills. And we're going to try to sum up each of these skills into like a 5-minute little period. So it's going to be kind of brief, but hopefully we provide you with some tips that you can use now if you're continuing to work from home, that you can use as you transition back into the office. Maybe that office space just looks different and your job is not the same. And then hopefully you can use these throughout your life. I think these tips were really relevant prior to the pandemic, and hopefully they will continue to be relevant after the pandemic one day ends as well. So first we will start with mindfulness.
All right, so this is, like Jamie mentioned at the beginning, these are our favorite things to talk about. So I'm gonna try to be as concise as possible. But so mindfulness, many of you probably are already familiar with this term. It's become really popular over the last, probably I would say about decade. And mindfulness is really just referring to a particular way of paying attention. it's paying attention right here to this exact, like this minute, this present moment right now. Most of the time, the way that I describe it, to folks and to myself, honestly, is that I feel like a lot of the time I have like a tornado of thoughts happening above my head. And I am like maybe driving a car or brushing my teeth or making dinner or even reading my kid a bedtime story, and I am not there. Right, my body is holding the steering wheel or the book or whatever, but my consciousness, my thinking is like up in this tornado, and it's thinking about the past, worrying about the past, worrying about the future. What do I need to get done? Planning for the future, what have you. But everything but this, right? Everything but this moment, I'm busily thinking about. So mindfulness is just the intentional practice of pulling yourself out of that tornado and putting yourself right here, right now, in this present moment. And the kind of the one of the best ways of doing that is by just using our senses, right? Our five senses. You can't really see anything that's, really see something that's not happening right now. You can't touch anything that's not happening right now. You can't taste anything unless it's right in this moment. And so kind of anchoring yourself with those five senses is a good way to pull yourself out of that kind of thought tornado and into the present moment. And one of the reasons that I like this so much, and that people, not just me, people are taken with the concept of mindfulness, is that it is so life affirming. So there's quite a bit of research, and the kind of research that I'm most interested in is when it is demonstrating that being present in this present moment, being here, being aware of it in kind of an open, non-judgmental way, kind of like a scientist, you might think, or like a newborn baby, how they're like kind of in awe of everything. Even when the present moment is unpleasant. So like, for example, when people are going through surgeries, when people are recovering from burn wounds and like having their wounds changed, all kinds of different, when people are experiencing like watching distressing movies, like eliciting stressful emotions, doing this, being present, being aware of what's happening in the here and now, results in less distress. It results in a higher quality of life. And so I think that's just really amazing that when we're here now, even when the now is really unpleasant, like it is now, frankly, it can be really life affirming and kind of lend itself, lead us on the path of having a more fulfilling, meaningful life. Okay, so let's see here. Let me make sure I said everything here. So regular mindfulness practice can help us with relaxation, managing our emotions, but it's not in itself a relaxation practice. And we're going to do a short practice in just a second. But it's important to remember that when we practice mindfulness, we're trying to be here and now. We're not trying to zone out or to really relax necessarily. That might happen, but it's really more about noticing what's happening now, so that we're not kind of just reacting to the present moment without really realizing what's going on. So like if you're, like, for example, if you're feeling really hot, if you're feeling really anxious, you may, really hungry, you may bite your kid's head off. You know what I mean? You may be more quick to react. And so being mindful is just being able to pay attention in this kind of curious, gentle, non-judgmental way, so that you aren't just reacting to all the stressors that's happening in your daily life. Okay, so that's sort of on a broad level, but on a more basic level, you can bring your full attention to any daily task with a sense of curiosity and openness. So for example, something you can practice like a mindful breathing exercise, which is what we'll do in just a minute. But it can be hard to make space in your day to just sit down, especially right now when you might have extra family members at home driving you crazy. It can be hard to find some time to just sit for even like 5 minutes and practice mindful breathing. But it can also be very useful to just incorporate mindfulness, bring yourself really there in this present moment when you're doing things like brushing your teeth, just feeling the sensations of that. And it sounds kind of silly to say it, but if you are really turning on all your senses, the smell of the toothpaste, the feeling of the bristles, and pulling, again, the whole idea is pulling yourself out of that thought tornado and just here in this present moment. Doing things like washing dishes, taking a bath or a shower, eating, any of those things, really, you can engage your senses and bring yourself right here, right now, to this present moment. Okay, so let's try it. But first, just a quick word. I always want to be aware of the fact that sitting and breathing is not so obviously related to helping our quality of life. And so just a quick note, why practicing mindful breathing could be relevant in this current time. And again, it's just pulling yourself down out of that thought tornado and into this moment where your life is happening, right? So if we spend our whole lives, or even a good chunk of our lives, in this tornado, worries about the thoughts in the future, we just lived our whole life, but we kind of missed it, right? We weren't there for it. And again, even when our present moment is pretty crappy, which it often is right now, it's better to show up for your life than to miss it, right? Okay, so let's just spend a few minutes. This will just be about 5 or 6 minutes, practicing being here and now, and also acknowledging some of the feelings that show up for us in that kind of non-judgmental, curious way. Okay, so I invite you to sit up straight and let your shoulders drop, and just gently push your feet into the floor. And get a sense of the ground beneath you. And you can either fix your eyes on a spot or close them, whatever you prefer. And just take a minute to notice how you are sitting. And notice how you are breathing. Notice what you can see. Notice what you hear. Notice what you can feel against your skin. And notice what you taste or sense in your mouth. Notice what you can smell or sense in your nostrils. Notice what you are feeling. And notice what you are thinking. For the next few breaths, I'd like you to focus on emptying out your lungs. Push all the air out of them until there's no more left. And then allow them to gently fill all by themselves. Really notice your breath. Notice where you can feel it flowing in and out. Observe it as if you are a curious scientist who has never encountered breathing before. Notice how once the lungs empty, they automatically refill all by themselves. And you can take a deep breath in if you want to, but notice how there's really no need to. The breath just happens by itself. And I invite you now to undertake a challenge. For the next minute or so, keep your attention on your breath, just observing it as it flows in and out. As this exercise continues, the feelings and sensations in your body will change. There may be pleasant feelings showing up, such as relaxation, calm, peacefulness, but there may be unpleasant ones, such as boredom, frustration, anxiety. or backache. Just see if you can allow those feelings to be just exactly as they are in this moment. Don't try to control your feelings. Just let them be as they are, regardless of whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. And keep your attention on your breathing. You likely notice that you're drifting off into thoughts occasionally, and that's perfectly normal. As soon as you realize this, just acknowledge it and gently refocus your attention on your breath. This is not a relaxation technique. You are not trying to relax. The aim is to let your feelings be as they are, to be here with them. Feel whatever you feel without a struggle. So if you're noticing a difficult feeling, just silently say to yourself, here is a feeling of frustration, or here is a feeling of anxiety, or here is a feeling of boredom. Acknowledge it's there and keep your attention on your breath. And now it's time to broaden your awareness out from your breath and recognize that your breathing is happening inside a body. So broaden your awareness out to your body. Sit up in your chair, maybe stretch your arms and legs, and just notice how it feels to be stretching. And your body is inside a room, so just look around the room you're in right now. And notice what you can see and hear. And that brings us basically to the end of this. And this is an exercise that you can do to make space for feelings that you're having at any time. You can kind of carry it with you, doing it anywhere you are. Probably it will be at your house right now. All right. Thanks.
All right. I feel like I need to be really soothing right now. Your calming, lovely voice. But I want to scream about emotions instead. So dovetailing kind of nicely from mindfulness into emotions, these things go hand in hand, right? We're going to break these down into kind of different sections, but a lot of these build upon each other, and they are not their own separate skills. And actually, oftentimes in therapy, before we teach clients about emotion regulation, we actually teach them mindfulness first, because it's kind of a core skill to being able to regulate your emotions appropriately. And one thing that I think Chelsea highlighted a little bit through that mindfulness exercise and through the discussion of mindfulness is that simply recognizing your emotions helps you to regulate those emotions. I think a lot of us go about our daily lives and we don't really take notice of how we're feeling as we, as we build up frustration towards our family members in our houses for not washing the dishes or whatever the case may be, right? And we notice maybe days later or a week later that, oh my gosh, I have been feeling so pent up and frustrated or sad or whatever that negative feeling might be for actually a really long time. And I just wasn't really recognizing that. And I certainly dealt with that. I spent the first 2 weeks of quarantine kind of feeling like, oh, good, this is fun, right? I get to work from home and this is nice, I don't have to commute to work, and kind of telling myself that I was sort of focusing on the positives. And then a couple weeks in, I'm married to a psychologist as well. And a couple weeks in, my husband and I were sitting there and we were like, oh my God, we are so stressed and we're sad, right? We're unmotivated. We were sitting there with our computers in front of us, kind of staring at a blank screen and not getting a whole lot done. And we'll talk about kind of the motivation issue a little bit more later. But one thing that we sort of talk about, and this is something that Chelsea touched on too, is sort of riding this wave of emotion. And that's because acknowledging your emotions and regulating those emotions isn't really about changing those emotions, right? It's simply about, if you feel sad, let yourself feel sad, right? If you feel frustrated, let yourself feel frustrated. You kind of ride that out. Um, and you acknowledge it and you recognize it, so that maybe you can change some of your behaviors accordingly to try to manage that a little bit better, right? But simply the recognition of how you're feeling automatically makes you regulate that a little bit better. So of course, you can't communicate your emotions effectively. You can't acknowledge when you're struggling. You can't acknowledge that you need to take a break, or take that break if you haven't stopped and taken note of what you're feeling to begin with. Um, and you can sort of, there are different ways to track your emotions or check in with your emotions. And one of the things that you want to do throughout your daily life, particularly in times of stress, is kind of making it a habit of checking in with what your emotional experience is throughout your day, right? And of course, that's going to fluctuate. It's not like one day you might feel perfectly content working from home and you think it's great, and the next day you have a different emotional experience. And I think that that's natural and that's okay. And you can acknowledge all of those different conflicting feelings. Um, but you might want to consider sort of tracking. Maybe you set a daily intention to check in with yourself every morning or every evening. Maybe if you have family members who are on board with this, everybody can check in with their feelings at dinner time, and you can sort of talk about this, right? And and I think these types of exercise really help, because first, it's recognizing your emotions, which then helps you to regulate those emotions. But also, recognizing those emotions can help you sort of regulate your time accordingly, right? I know for me, when I have days where I have numerous Zoom meetings, regular meetings don't really make me that exhausted, but for some reason, Zoom meetings really take it out of me, right? I think it's kind of, you're not really there, right? And you're kind of looking at these tiny little boxes like we're doing right now, right? um and that doesn't, for me, it makes me feel like, oh man, I miss people even more, right? I have this like very real realization that I'm not with other people. And so Zoom meetings for me kind of drain all of my energy. And once I started to recognize that that was happening, I started, when possible, to manage my day a little bit differently on those days, right? If you know that Zoom meetings make you exhausted, then maybe try to do tasks on those days that take a little bit less of an emotional toll, right? On the flip side, if you're somebody who really needs those Zoom meetings and those invigorate you, um, then maybe you capitalize on that and use those days to get a little bit more done, because you know that you're going to have a little bit more mental wellness during those types of times. And this isn't right. This isn't a perfect science. We can't all navigate our days in a way that makes our emotional experience exactly what we want it to be. But when you recognize these things and try to better understand your emotions, you'll find yourself much more able to regulate those emotions, and you'll find yourself better able to, and more willing to take those breaks, right? To say, I need to take a walk around the block because I just had a terrible meeting, right? And it drained everything out of me. So I'm going to spend this time doing something that is helpful for me. Um, and of course, sometimes, right? This has probably happened to many of you. Your emotions are going to get the best of you, and this is perfectly natural, and this is a perfectly normal experience. And we have different skills for that. That even if you're recognizing your emotions, you might still need to be more active in coping with them. And you can take steps to do that. Um, so when you're finding that, you've acknowledged, okay, I feel frustrated, right? Now what? what do I do? Um, and so you've got a lot of different options. One of the easiest options that you can do is distracting yourself. And this is kind of one of our baseline options. So I don't want this to be your go-to every single time that you feel distressed, because I think sometimes people take distraction techniques and they accidentally use those as sweeping under the rug techniques. And you don't want to do that, right? You want, when you're using a distraction technique, you want to recognize that emotion and then take a really active approach in doing something that does not allow you to further engage with that negative emotion. So for instance, let's say that you have an interaction with someone that's really frustrating, particularly if this is like a time limited kind of issue, right? That you know that you're going to feel really frustrated for the next 10 minutes and then tomorrow this issue is not even going to matter. You can sort of deal with that distressing event by doing something that is incompatible with thinking about that problem, right? For instance, a lot of people will use exercise as a distress tolerance technique. You want to be careful if you're using it as a distraction, right? If you're somebody who runs and then your thoughts go wild while you're running, that's not a distraction technique. That might do the job of distress tolerance, but you're not distracting yourself from that emotion. You might actually be throwing yourself into it further. But if you're doing something like push-ups, and you can't possibly do push-ups without thinking about the excruciating pain in your arms, right? Then that allows you to be more mindful, right? To focus on that sensation in your body rather than the frustrating interaction you just had with another person. But there's all kinds of different distraction techniques, right? You can, for me, something that I do a lot, painting my nails is something that I am incapable of thinking of other things because you're trying to get, not get nail polish all over your fingers. Or maybe you bake and it's hard for you to measure out ingredients while you're thinking about, the fact that your kids just painted all over the walls or something or whatever happened, right? So anything that sort of allows you to just throw yourself in something else is a good sort of lower level distress tolerance task. And sort of what Chelsea talked about, we do a lot of engaging our senses in distress tolerance as well, and that really sort of goes back to that core of mindfulness. One thing, if you're in a real pinch and you're really about to blow, what you can actually do is hold an ice cube. Get an ice cube out of your freezer and you hold an ice cube. And first, one of the reasons is that it's impossible to think about other things as your hand is like on fire from the ice, right? It kind of hurts to have an ice cube in your hand. It's not a comfortable sensation. But also there's a physiological reason for doing this too. When we get really angry or upset or frustrated, our bodies physically become warm. And there's a really strong mind-body connection. So when you do something like go and hold an ice cube or go and take a cold shower, if that's easy for you to go do and kind of on a whim, you physically cool your body down, and then that gives your mind cues to calm down as well. And you can do other sort of bodily sensation type of things too, right? If you go back to your five senses, think of things that are soothing for you. Maybe you really like to watch videos on Facebook of people power washing their sidewalk, right? Maybe that's really soothing to you. I really like to watch people decorate cookies, right? It could be any number of things that are sort of these soothing activities. Maybe you like taking baths. Maybe you like scented candles, whatever that may be. If you take those sort of five senses, or things that are engaging one of your senses, and you sort of throw yourself into that task, that can be a really helpful sort of distress tolerance technique. And actually one of the things that we tell therapy clients to do a lot, or just in general, a mental health tip, I do this when I feel really stressed, is to engage those five senses a little bit like we did in that mindfulness exercise. We will tell people to think of 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can smell, 2 things that you can taste. What am I missing? And 1 thing that you can touch, right? And you sort of do this countdown, and the reason for that is if you are about to say something that you wish you weren't going to say, or you're about to send an email that you know that in 10 minutes you're going to wish you hadn't sent, if you take a step back and you recognize these things in your environment, you're going to be able to tolerate those distressful feelings just a lot better, right? It's not about changing those emotions. It's about acknowledging them, taking a step back, and letting yourself sort of deal with that and come back with sort of fresh emotional stability. And then I think another thing to do, right, is to remind yourself that this is going to pass, and maybe even try to find some meaning in these types of experiences, right? I think it's hard we're in a really tough environment right now, and there's a lot of stressors. But I think we can also sort of find some purpose in this, and that can help us get through difficult times as well, right? That there's probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? Maybe not many times in your life when you're going to have this unique situation with your family where everybody is there all the time, right? You're probably learning a lot of things about yourself, about your relationships, about your family, etc., right? That maybe you still wish that, like, you know, you had a bigger house or more space or whatever for people to go. You wish you could send your kids to school. But you might also find some sort of meaning in what's happening right now. And that can be really helpful. And Chelsea's going to talk a little bit more about gratitude at the end of this as well. But then just reminding yourself that all these things pass, right? You ride the wave of emotion, negative emotions pass. This pandemic will pass one day, right? Even our most difficult life circumstances eventually will be less stressful for us. And so switching gears just a little bit to talk about motivation. I mentioned that this was one of my bigger struggles throughout this whole process. And I think in part, right, when our jobs potentially changed, we became, even if your job description didn't change or everything that you were doing in your job stayed the same, but it just went digital, you are still less active throughout your day. You're not getting up. Maybe you still get up and you get dressed and you put on makeup if that's your thing, or you do all the things that you did. I know I personally do not, right? And so a lot of that has changed for a lot of people. But also, you're not driving to work. You're not having these sort of small social interactions throughout your day. You're not walking around so much, right? Your situation has just changed. We're a lot less active than we were before. And inactivity is actually really bad for our mental health. I think at first, if you spend a Saturday vegging on the couch or watching Netflix or whatever, that can feel really nice and relaxing to do for a day, maybe. But actually, the more time you spend sort of vegging on the couch, or the more time you spend sort of sitting in one place without engaging in sort of a mixture of different activities, the less energy you have and the less motivation you have to do things, even things that you really enjoy. And the byproduct of that is that it can make you feel sad. It can have a huge impact on your mood. So you kind of have this downward spiral, right? Where you cycle and you find yourself less active, and that makes you less motivated, and then you do less things, even fewer things that you enjoy, and then your mood is sad, and when your mood is sad, you have less energy, you feel less motivated to do things, you engage in fewer activities, and then that sort of has this downward spiral effect. But luckily, this is one thing that we are actually very good at dealing with, and we call it behavioral activation. And essentially what we do is we initiate an upward spiral. So Um, instead of vegging on the couch, because that's what we want to do, right? We initiate an activity sequence where, even if it's something small, right, where you walk around the apartment, or you walk around your house, or you walk around the block, or whatever, right? Even if you do something small like that, that can behaviorally activate you. And the more you do, the more energy you have, the more motivation you have to do other things, and then your mood improves. So you sort of reverse that spiral. And I think for a lot of us, this is kind of it's difficult to think that this is what's happening to certain people, right? For many of you, I think it's an opposite problem. You don't have a problem of sitting on your couch and doing nothing. You have a problem of a million different things being thrown at you. But I think some of these same principles can apply, right? If you, even if you're not like bored with your job and wondering when this is going to end so you can go do something, I think we can initiate the same sort of thing with pleasurable activities, right? If you're overloaded with stressful tasks, that's also not helping your mental health, and you can initiate the same sort of behavioral activation system by doing something pleasurable, even if you have so many other competing responsibilities that are not pleasurable to you, right? Take 5 minutes to do something that brings you sort of happy, nice feelings, and then you'll be more motivated in the future to do that more, right? Take the time, even if you feel like, man, I really don't want to have that phone call with this friend, I'm too tired, right? Do that, because it actually will initiate this upward sort of spiral. And the other thing that I think it's important to talk about in sort of some of our potential loss in motivation or loss in productivity, first, I think acknowledge the fact that your world has changed and forgive yourself for maybe not being as productive as you were before. I think before, I used to get this all the time because I work from home a lot already. And people would say, I mean, you basically don't even have a job, right? And I think now we're finding that there's different challenges to this different environment, right? And that having an unstructured environment doesn't necessarily make us more productive, right? Even if that unstructured environment has more time in it. So, and then when you put a pandemic and you take away your coping resources, that doubly doesn't help. So you might be having some trouble meeting your goals. And something that's important to think about is not necessarily having these giant long-term goals, and maybe you have those in your mind, but you might want to rethink how you set and measure your goals in your daily life. And many of you have probably heard of SMART goals before, that you want your goals to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And this is one that has been super, super important for me when I recognize, like, whoa, I am just not getting things done. How is this possible? I have all this time. And what I started to do was basically start setting all of these really small goals. I printed out a monthly calendar where I literally put little animal stickers every day that I exercise. I have a little chart. It looks like children live in our house, like it's a kindergarten classroom a little bit, but but I have this chart that sort of looks like a fundraising chart where I mark off the hours that I'm working. And the byproduct of that, I don't even have like a reward at the end of this, right? The byproduct is that I'm just being more, I'm acknowledging kind of these small goals as I'm working, right? And in each hour that I work, I get to fill in this little bubble, and that makes me feel good for weird reasons. But also it's making these goals really, really measurable, and we're sort of seeing the outcome, and we're seeing the progress that we're making, and that helps us to stay on track. And you can do all kinds of things like that. Sticker charts really work. There's apps for this. There's like focus apps. There's different things that you can put on your browser if you're finding it hard to sort of stay focused throughout your day and you're finding yourself doing a million different things, even if it's all work related tasks, right? We do better when we focus on specific things for a shorter period of time. So if that's a struggle for you, consider tracking your progress. Set small little goals. Decide what the outcome is supposed to be. Not just I want to be more productive, right? Because that could mean lots of different things. Does that mean you want to focus better? Does that mean you want to get a greater number of things done, right? Set exactly what it is that you want, and then find a way to measure that and track that. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about acceptance.
All right. Yeah, there's, I was thinking as Jamie was talking about other examples of kind of basically having a different set of struggles. So, you know, like I mentioned, having kids at home makes it a lot harder to get things done, right? It's not like, oh, why am I not getting this done? I know why. And it's the 3-year-old's reason. So anyway, acceptance has been very important to me during this time. Acceptance of the fact that this is just a hard time. I mean, there's no way around it. And like this mentions, the circumstances have changed dramatically, right? I used to have time to myself from like 8 to 4:30 to, you know, make a plan, get my work done. And that does not exist anymore, right? I have time when I pretty much lock my kids, get in her room for an hour every day, and that's it. So that's not very many, that's a really big change. And so I have worked on changing my expectations along with it. And that doesn't mean throwing everything work related out the window, because I like my job. There are things that just have to get done, and there are things that are meaningful to me that I want to get done. But I have worked on revising the timelines basically for these things, and kind of from a practical standpoint, setting goals for that 1 hour. Like, what am I going to get done during this 1 hour? And if I didn't get it done, if I worked hard and didn't get it done, like, it is what it is. Trying to be as gracious as possible with myself, because when I have noticed that I'm not being showing grace to myself or compassion to myself, it starts to sort of spiral, right? It's not like that makes me more productive. It kind of overwhelms me, and then it feels like I'm not doing well at any task, right? Like at laundry, at cooking, at blah blah blah, whatever, including work. So trying to show myself grace and compassion has actually helped increase my productivity during these narrow windows that I have right now. Yeah, so that's kind of in line with the idea of just forgiving yourself for when you don't meet the mark. And likewise, showing compassion to the people in your household. I'm sure all of this is not new news, right? But everybody is struggling. So our kids are struggling, our parents are struggling, and they're really hard to deal with. And we're harder to deal with than usual. And so trying to sort of bring some openness and some compassion to relationships, even more so than we did before, I think can be helpful in maintaining our relationship satisfaction, but also our sanity really during all of this. And kind of like we've been talking about throughout, it's like we're pre-programmed to struggle against negative emotions, right? To try to like eradicate them, to try to not feel them, or kind of perseverate over why are we feeling them over and over to try to like solve it. And that is really usually not that helpful. So acceptance, mindfulness, emotion regulation, all of this has in common the notion that we feel what we feel, right? If we could just change how we feel, psychology wouldn't be a thing. We would just all do that. And so kind of building up the skill of being able to acknowledge and sit with what's going on right now, sit with those emotions, acknowledge your circumstances, and choose to accept it, to make space for that, to kind of like, I think of it like visually, I think of like really kind of opening up around whatever that painful feeling is of frustration or failure or anxiety, and just know it's here, right? It's part of what makes us a human being. And instead of trying to struggle with it. a phrase that sometimes gets used in therapy contexts and maybe in other contexts too, is like drop the rope. So if we're in a tug of war with our emotions, right, we're just like pulling hard against this like nasty feeling of anxiety that keeps cropping up. If what would happen if we just let go of that rope, we just let that anxiety ball be a part of who we are right now, because it's not going anywhere, and us fighting against it is kind of sucking all of our attention and resources away from living our lives, right? And so sort of it's kind of like there is a monkey on our back, right? Our emotions, that's what they are. And so kind of allowing them to be there, instead of dedicating so many resources and energy to try to get them away or whatever, through all kind of means, right? My husband and I just recently had a conversation after we lost our patience for the millionth time in putting our kids to bed. Like, maybe we should not have cocktail hour every like evening at 5. We've been like, oh, quarantine's so fun, we can make margaritas every night or whatever. And it's like, actually, no, let's not stop doing that, right? So yeah, so on whatever scale it is, we may be trying to not feel those feelings. And it might be like kind of funny and innocent seeming, but really in the end, it can actually be pretty, make things worse, make things harder to deal with. So one of the ways that we can accept our circumstances, but also kind of broaden our awareness, not to just the things that are kind of top of mind right now, which probably are, the things top of mind are probably pretty stressful, right? I know they are for me. This is, I find myself in these narrow windows that I have, when I'm not in the middle of doing something else, I'm like reading my news briefing. I mean, this is not smart, right? I don't need to do that every day even, and maybe like a once a week check-in would be fine. And so instead of zoning in our attention to these sort of problems that we're experiencing, which are very real, we can neglect then recognizing the things that are really good and precious about this time, things that we do feel grateful for. We just may not acknowledge them on a daily basis. I know there have been several moments where I've thought, I'm going to look back on this time, and there are certain parts of it that are very sweet, right? That are very precious. Like, I mean, not for some people, it's getting to spend more time with family members, even though maybe they're driving you crazy, or what have you, more time, whatever your circumstances outside, whatever the case may be. But recognizing those things and cultivating gratitude, it's something we have to cultivate, right? It's not, we are kind of like programmed as people to see problems and try to fix problems. And that is helpful to helping us survive, right? When we were like cave people. But now it's not so helpful that all we do is like zone in on problems and try to solve them. There's a lot of problems that we can't solve right now on our own. And so broadening our attention out to things to be grateful for can be really powerful. There's lots of research on gratitude. One of the studies that I think is actually representative. Most studies have found similar results, but participants who wrote down 3 good things each day for 1 week reported greater happiness 6 months later than participants who just wrote down, I think it was like, wrote down 3 kind of annoying things that happened that day. I don't know about you, but when I'm rehashing my day with my partner, I usually am like, here are 3 annoying things that happened to me today. Much more likely to do that than to be like, here are 3 good things I feel happy and grateful about. And so switching that to talk about or write down, I have started the practice of keeping a gratitude journal, just being grateful for things that are very small, right? Like we found in the back of the freezer a mango popsicle that was so delicious or whatever. Or, things like I'm happy that are grateful to have our air conditioning works. We thought it wasn't thought it was not working, and then it was an easy fix. So really small things like that, just noticing them each day can be something that we can do to sort of take the reins away from this problem solving, or I guess problem focused approach to life. All right, I guess that brings us to the end of these like brief tips. And like Jamie mentioned, these are just super short snapshots of things that are commonly used and can have been helpful in our own lives, certainly. We just have a few minutes, but if anybody has questions or comments, it'd be great to hear.
Mm-hmm. Everybody is just very mentally well.
I certainly think, I mean, again, I wish for many reasons that we could be kind of in a room together, because it would be interesting to see. I think there is kind of a divide in people who have just a lot of stuff to juggle all of a sudden. And then the experience of having just a lot of time to figure out how to make meaningful. Anyway.
Yeah, and they both present their own struggles, right? And I think every person right now has a lot of different things going on, and there are a lot of different reasons to be anxious or stressed or whatever, right? Just depending on your circumstances. And I think probably our take-home message here is to acknowledge whatever those feelings are, regardless of what your circumstances are. Try to be accepting of yourself and accepting of the circumstances, and try to just regulate that as best as you can, even if you know that this isn't this isn't you at 100% right now. I think most of us wouldn't say that this is us at 100%. And we want this to go on forever, right? And I think just letting yourself acknowledge that that's okay right now.
I've also started, I know this is supposed to be Q&A and we're just like, but anyway, I also have recommended to clients, but to myself, to put my hand over my heart and just think like, sweetheart, like this is hard. You're doing something hard. And that has been helpful to me, is just to acknowledge it, and putting my hand on my chest for some reason really has helped me be like, just showing myself some grace right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we could all do a little bit better from that. I think we have a Trina, do you have a question? It looks like your hand is raised.
Hi, I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to thank you both, as a lot of the tips that you've mentioned, I have 2 teenage daughters, and so they're kind of suffering through, school ending and not really ending for them. And so the information you've shared today is very helpful, that I can also share with my daughters and talk with them about through their lifestyle change and everything as well. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and absolutely use this on yourself and with your family members. I would be happy to make these available to everyone to send, so that you guys can sort of talk about these different tips. Most of these they're not difficult, right? I think sometimes it seems like psychologists or therapists have some sort of mystery formula that we use, and actually these are not difficult tips to use. They're really small things that make a really big difference in your life. And so, please, by all means, use them with anyone and everyone.
If you wouldn't mind sharing, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Thank you.
And regarding the mindfulness thing, there are many, I'm sure you probably are already aware, but there are many different apps. Some cost money, some are free, that do guide, like kind of similar to what I talked through. One is called the Mindfulness Coach. This is free, and they have like 10 free things like this that you can listen to. But there's other free ones as well out there. But that's one way to kind of keep it going without having somebody talking you through it.
Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of different productivity apps and goal setting apps. I mean, I use one where you have to plant a tree, and then if you leave the app in the time period that you set, then your little tree dies. Obviously, there's no actual ramifications if my little digital tree dies, but if you're really invested in the tree, and so it just sort of keeps me on track and keeps me focused for shorter periods of time or whatever. So there's all kinds of resources out there. All right. Well, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. I will put this on. Send this out to everybody, but thank you guys for being here.
Thanks so much. It was great talking to you guys.
Chelsea.